Hello everyone. Today we are going to cover PowerPoint slide lecture 4, and this is basically chapter 3 on your book. So we will cover the first part of chapter 3 on this PowerPoint slide lecture 4 and in this video lecture. So chapter 3 basically talks about demand and supply and how equilibrium happens in the market. It also talks about certain concepts such as a price floor and price ceiling. But in this video lecture, we will talk about the first part of the chapter, which is demand. On the next lecture, we will talk about supply and then figure out how the market reaches an equilibrium by due to interactions between demand and supply. But in this lecture, we will focus on demand. So before we go into demand and supply, we first need to understand what markets are. So basically, market is an interaction between the demand from consumer side and supply from the business side. So demand is basically created by consumers. When we want to buy something or purchase something, that's when demand is created, and supply is created by producers. When the businesses are producing, let's say, mobile phones or televisions or cars, then they are producing the supply. So that's how supply comes from businesses, demand comes from the consumers, and when consumers and suppliers meet and interact, then that place is called a market. Now, it does not have to be a physical market. It can be a virtual market like Amazon. It's a virtual marketplace, right? Walmart is a physical marketplace. So market can be physical or virtual, okay? And a market system is most efficient when there is perfect competition. We talked about this before. If there are large number of producers, if there are large number of sellers in the market, then there is a lot of competition, so output will be maximized and therefore the market will be efficient. And one of the characteristics of perfect competition is there will be a large number of buyers, which means large number of consumers, and at the same time there will be a large number of producers or suppliers in the market. So these large numbers of buyers will interact with this large number of producers in the market, and there will be a lot of competition, there will be a lot of negotiation in terms of the price, and that eventually will lead to an efficient market system. So that's why perfect competition is most efficient. If you are in the micro class, you will know that later, because we are going to delve into details about perfect competition. An example of perfect competition would be the international bazaar, or the stock market. So what is demand? Demand is basically created by consumers. Demand is the relationship between possible prices of a product and the corresponding quantities of product that would be demanded by consumers. Okay, so it is a series of prices and corresponding quantities that consumers are willing and able to buy at a particular point of time. So remember, to understand this definition, it's basically demand is a series of prices and its corresponding quantity demanded that consumers are willing and able, so it has to be both willing and able to buy at a particular point of time. Okay, now there is a law of demand, and this law of demand states that there is an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded, or basically the law says there is a negative relationship between price and quantity demanded. So what does that mean? That means that if price of a product goes up, we will buy less of that good, and if the price of a product goes down, we will buy more of that good. It's basic knowledge, right? We will act accordingly. Let's say if the price of TV goes up today, less of us will buy TV. If the price of TV goes down, then we will probably buy more TVs. So that's why basically the law of demand says price and quantity demanded, they have a negative relationship or inverse relationship. Now we also have to understand the difference between quantity demanded and demand. So quantity demanded is basically the amount of product that consumers are willing and able to buy at a particular price, whereas demand is the series of prices and their corresponding quantity demanded. So let me do a quick example so you understand this. So let's say we are given with this table. This is price, okay, and then we have quantity or we have quantity demanded, okay, or the demand. Now when price is $10, demand is 1. When price is 9, demand is 2. When price is 8, demand is 3. When price is 7, demand is 4, and so forth. So let's say for a product we are given with this table, and from this table we can look at the inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded, right? As price goes down, your quantity demanded is actually going up, right? And if you go look at the other way, if price goes up, your quantity demand goes down. So that's proves the inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. Now I want you to understand the difference between demand and quantity demanded. Okay, so quantity demanded is basically when a person is willing and able to buy a particular quantity at a particular price. So if we look at this particular point at $10, the quantity demanded is 1. So this 1 is quantity demanded, or this 3 alone by itself is quantity demanded. So it is the demand at a particular price. So it is the demand at a particular price, or at, let's say at $7, the demand is 4, so that's called quantity demanded. Okay, these individual ones are called quantity demanded. Whereas demand as a whole is a series of prices and their corresponding quantity demanded that consumers are willing and able to buy at a particular point of time. So it basically means it's a series of prices, right? So it is a series of prices and their corresponding quantity demanded at a particular point of time. So this as a whole is known as demand. So you need to understand the difference between two. Quantity demanded is basically the demand at a particular price. You know, for $9 the demand is 2, that's quantity demanded. And demand as a whole is basically, it's a series of prices and their corresponding quantity demanded. Okay, so the total market demand for goods and services consists of the sum of individual demand relationships of all possible buyers. So when we look at the demand, when we look at the market demand for, let's say, books or TVs, then it basically adds up or sums the individual demand for all the individuals who are in need of the TV or the book. Okay, now there are 3 reasons why demand and price have a negative relationship. So we have to understand. So, and this is very important. This can be a multiple choice questions in your exam. So make sure you understand this. So these are the 3 reasons why there is a our basic knowledge. Based on our basic knowledge, we know that price and quantity demand have a negative relationship, but there are 3 underlying reasons why these 2 variables act like that. So the first one is called income effect. So what happens is, if a price falls, that means more of your income is available, so you can buy more goods, right? So think about it in this way. Let's say your income is $3,000 a month and your rent is $1,000. Now starting from next month, your rent drops to $800. What happens? You have $200 additional that you can use to buy other goods and services. So there is an income effect. Okay, if price decreases, you have more purchasing power and you can buy more goods. On the other hand, if price increases, then you have less purchasing power, right? If the rent went up to $1,200, now you have to spend additional $200 on rent. So your purchasing power on other goods and services will probably go down. So the first reason for the inverse relationship is because of income effect. Then the second reason is called the substitution effect. Okay, example would be a Pepsi and Coke. You know, substitution effect means when 2 goods can be easily replaced by one another. That's when we are going to have substitution effect. So when 2 goods they have similar characteristics and we can easily replace one another. Consider this example. Okay, let's say in the market right now, a bottle of Coke cost $1 and a bottle of Pepsi also costs $1. Now suddenly, due to some factors, the price of Coke goes up to $2. What happens? Some of the people will switch to Pepsi because the price of Pepsi did not change and it's very similar to Coke. So some of the people will start buying Pepsi. So that's substitution effect, and that's why price and quantity demanded have a negative relationship, because people are switching to the substitutes. Okay, so that's the second reason. And then the third reason is called the law of diminishing marginal utility. So what does that mean? The law of diminishing marginal utility? What that means is basically at a given price, consumers will buy more and more of an item, but at the same time, the person starts receiving less and less additional utility from each additional unit consumed. Okay, so let me give an example of the law of diminishing marginal utility. Let's say you did a lot of hard work, you shifted your apartment, so you did a lot of hard work and you're very thirsty now, so you are desiring for a Coke. So you drink a Coke and then you want another Coke, so you drink your second Coke. But your enjoyment from the second Coke, or your utility from the second Coke, will be less than the first Coke you consumed. Then let's say you consumed the third Coke, and then after the third Coke you probably will not want any more of the Coke on that particular day, right? So that's the law of diminishing marginal utility. As you are consuming more and more of one particular item, your additional satisfaction that you're generating from that item decreases. So as a result, you are not willing to accept that item anymore unless the price goes down. Okay, so that's the law of diminishing marginal utility. So let me show it to you here. Again, let's say the first Coke gives you 10 utilities, then the second Coke gives you 5 utilities, third Coke gives you 1 utility. So as you are consuming more of one product, your utility is actually going down, right? It's going down from 10 to 5 to 1. And fourth Coke, you probably don't want it. You don't want it because you probably have zero utility or negative utility. You will only buy it if the price goes down. If the price of Coke goes down, then probably you're going to buy it. So that's why, again, price and quantity demanded have a negative relationship. So these are the three main factors why price and quantity demanded have a negative relationship: the income effect, the substitution effect, and the law of diminishing marginal utility. Okay, now there are three basic methods of analysis that we will use to study demand and supply. Now, demand, it can be the relationship between price and demand can be expressed in three ways. The first one is called descriptive analysis. So when I said the law of demand says that the price and a quantity demanded have a negative relationship or have an inverse relationship because of three underlying factors: income effect, substitution effect, and law of diminishing marginal utility. That's a description analysis. We are using theories, concepts to explain the relationship between price and quantity demanded. So that's descriptive analysis. We are using theories, we are using concepts to explain the relationship between price and quantity demanded. The second method to explain the relationship is called the tabular analysis, and that also I did. If you look at the table that I drew in the beginning of the class, this one, this is another good way to explain the relationship between price and quantity demanded, because if you see, if price goes down, your quantity demanded is actually going up. If price goes up, your quantity demanded is going down, right? And this method is called tabular analysis. We are listing the data in a table and we are trying to understand the relationship between price and quantity demanded. Okay, and the final one is called graphical analysis. Okay, and that's the one that's commonly used. So graphical analysis is basically one way or one tool we use to understand the relationship between price and quantity demanded. And usually the demand curve will always be downward sloping. Okay, so you have to remember this is a graphical analysis. On the x-axis we will always have quantity demanded, on the y-axis we will always have price. Okay, and the demand curve will always be negative, will always be downward sloping because of the negative relationship that exists, which again means if price goes down, if the price is going down, your quantity demanded is going up. right? So this gives us the relationship, this gives us the negative relationship, that price and quantity demand, and graphical analysis. We can often use the table, the data in the table, to plot a graph and understand the relationship. We are going to end up with the same type of graph. It will be always downward sloping. Now it can be a straight line or it can be a graph like this, but for our class, for this class, we will only focus on demand curve that are downward and that are straight lines and downward sloping. Now we can be a downward sloping curve, but for this class we don't focus on that. We will only look at straight line downward sloping demand curves. So these are the three different tools that helps us to understand the relationship between price and quantity demanded. Okay. Now there is a function for demand, and I wanted to go over that. So the function, and this function is only applicable for straight lines. That demand function, basically the demand function is given by, there is a basic template or formula. This demand function is given by QD is equals to A plus BP, where QD is the demand, okay, and P is the price, and A and B are constants, okay, and this is applicable only if the demand curve is, so this is applicable if demand curve is a straight line. So as long as the demand curve is a straight line, downward sloping straight line, this equation will hold. And for our class, again, remember, we're only going to look into straight lines. We're not going to look into any curves. So this straight line equation we are always gonna use to understand. And I might give you an example to calculate or to find out this equation. And I will do an example so you understand how to calculate it. Okay, so let me do the example so it's clear to all of you. Okay, so let's say you're given with a table. We are usually given with a table or with a graph, but let's say here you're given with a table, and the table says 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's the price: $0, $1, $2, $3, $4. Let's just say it's for a type of good. Okay, now if it's $0, the demand will be 100. If it's $1, when price is rising, demand is going down. It's 92. When it's $3, well, I'm sorry, when it's $2, it's 84. When it's $3, it's 76. And when it's $4, it's 68. So let's say you're given with this table. So based on this table, my first question will be plot the graph. Okay, so based on this table, plot the graph. So again, you draw the graph. It does not have to be exact, but you just have to make sure the shape and the numbers look okay. So remember, on the x-axis, quantity demanded will always be on the x-axis. Many people, I have seen students put quantity demand or quantity supplied on the y-axis, so that's wrong. Quantity will never be on the y-axis. Quantity demanded will be on the x-axis, and price will be always on the y-axis. Okay, now let's start. When price is equal to 0, quantity demanded is 100. Okay, so price is 0, quantity demanded is 100. Then it says when price is equals to 1, quantity demanded is 92. Okay, then it says when price is equals to 2, quantity demanded is 84. When price is equals to 3, quantity demanded is 76. And when price is equals to 4, quantity demanded is 68. Then we connect the dots, and it is a downward sloping straight line, which gives us the demand function for this product. Now let's say this is a pen. Just assume this is a pen. So this is the demand function. So if I ask you to draw the demand function or the demand curve, this is the demand curve. This is how you use the table to draw the demand curve. And remember, demand curves are always going to be downward sloping. Now, based on this, we will ask, or I will ask you the second question. What is the demand function for this particular good? So when I say demand function, I am talking about the equation that I just talked about, so which is QD is equals to A plus BP. So I need to find out for this particular product what is the demand function. Okay, so Q, D and P, these are variables, they will change because that's how we are trying to find out the relationship, but we have to find out the value of A and B, and then we can know the demand function. Okay, so let's say here in this case, A is equal to the quantity demanded when price is equals to 0. So this is always the case. Okay, A is the quantity demanded when your price is equal to 0. That's how you find out the value of A. So the value of A is equals to the quantity demanded when price is equal to 0. If we scroll up, when the price is 0, what is quantity demanded? So if you see, when the price is 0, the quantity demanded is 100, so the value of A is 100. It's easy. See, that's how we found out. So now we are almost there. We have half of the equation. So we have QD equals 100 plus BP. So now our turn is to calculate the value of B, and in order to calculate B, we just plug in any one of the values from the equation. You know, you can take this value, you can take this value, any value you can take, you will end up with the same value for B. Okay, so for simplicity purposes, let's say I'm going to take these points. Okay, so 1 and 92. So when price is equals to 1, quantity demanded is 92. So 92 equals 100 plus B, we don't know the value. Price is 1, right? At price 1, the quantity demanded is 92. That's what we are doing. Okay, and if we calculate it, it's going to come out to be 92 minus 100, which is equals to minus 8. So look at this negative sign there. The slope will always be negative for a demand curve because it is a downward sloping curve. So the value of B will always be negative for a demand curve. For a demand curve, the value of B will always be negative because it's a downward sloping curve. Okay, now just to make sure we did it right, let's look and check at another point. Let's say we take this point now and see if the value of B still comes to be 8. Okay, so let's scroll down. Again, we have the equation QD equals to 100 plus BP. Okay, this time the price is 2, the quantity demand is 84. So 84 equals 100 plus 2B, because we don't know the price, the value of B. Then we can have then we are going to have 2B equals 84 minus 100, or 2B equals minus 16, which is equals to B equals minus 8. See, we are still getting the same value of for B. So no matter which point we take, from this table, no matter which point we take, whether this or this or this, we are going to end up with the same value for B. But for a demand curve, always remember the value of B is going to be negative because it is a downward sloping demand curve. Okay, so now we know the value of B, now we know the value of A. So the demand function is given by QD equals 100 minus 8B. That is the demand function. Okay, now if I say what will be the demand when price is equals to $10, okay, once you find out the demand function, I can ask you this question: if price is equals to 10, what is quantity demanded? Now you have the function, you can easily calculate it. Basically QD will be equals to 100 minus 8, and you know the value of P, which is 10, so you plug it in. So 100 minus 80, and that is equals to 20. So your quantity demanded will be 20. So either ways, I can give you quantity demanded and you can find out price, or I can give you the price and you can find out quantity demanded based on the function. So this is a very helpful. We can use this function to plot the graph. We can use this function to find out other values at different values for price and quantity demanded. And in the exam, I can give you a table, and then I can ask you to draw the graph, and then or in the homework, and I can ask you to draw the graph and then come up with the equation. So you must know how we did this, and this example will actually help you how you can calculate the equation. So moving on, again, this basically talks, a change in price is the only factor for which there can be a direct change in quantity demanded. If there is a change in other factors, we will see a change in demand. Now, this is another very important thing that you guys have to know. Basically, what it's saying is when we look at a demand curve, and we all know demand curves are downward sloping by now. So what it says is when there is a change in price, there will be a movement along the curve. Okay, there will be a movement along the curve. No shifts. So if there is a change in price, if the price decreases or increases, the points will move within the curve. So there will be a movement within the curve, but there won't be any shifts. However, if there is a change in other factors, and we're going to talk about what these factors are, demand curve will shift. So you have to understand this. If the price changes, we will only move along the curve. However, if the price does not change but other factors change, which we will discuss, the demand curve will either shift to the left, right, or shift to the left. So demand curve can shift to the right or the left due to changes in other factors, but a movement will happen in the demand curve if there is a change in price. So you must remember this. A change in price will cause movement along the curve. A change in other factors will cause the demand curve to shift to the right or shift to the left. Okay, now we need to know what are these other factors that cause the demand curve to shift to the right or to the left. Okay, so what are the factors that affect the demand curve, or what are the factors that affect demand that causes the entire demand curve to shift to the right or to the left? So there are 5 determinants that cause this: taste and preference, number of buyers, level of income, price of related goods, and consumer expectations. And I'm going to go over each of these determinants so you understand how it affects demand. But first, let me clean out the board so I can explain you guys better. Okay, so the 5 determinants, the first one is called taste and preference. What it basically means, if the preference for one product by consumer increases, then the demand for that product will increase and the curve will shift to the right. Okay, let's say right now the trend is using iPhones, Apple phones. So everyone starts buying Apple phones, and as a result, the demand curve for iPhones will shift to the right. Okay, so that's what it's basically trying to say. Basically, if the preference for iPhone goes up, so the demand will go up and the demand curve will shift to the right, assuming there is no change in price. Okay, so that's preference, taste. If someone's taste, people are now more inclined, or their taste is now to buy more savvy products such as iPhones rather than Android phones. So the demand for iPhones will go up and the curve will shift to the right. Okay, similarly, if we think about that's what's happening, what will happen to the demand curve for Samsung curve or for Samsung phones? In that case, the demand curve for Samsung phone will shift to the left, right? Because now people are buying more iPhones, so the demand curve for iPhones shifts to the right, but for Android phones or Samsung phones, the demand curve shifts to the left because there is less preference for Android phones and there is more preference for iPhones. So that's one factor that can cause, or that can shift the demand curve to the left or to the right. Okay, so the next factor is number of buyers. This is easy to understand. If the number of buyers go up in the market, the demand will go up and the demand curve will shift to the right. So if there is a migration of population or a migration of people coming into the city of Dallas from, let's say, from California, so demand for all products will go up and demand curve will shift to the right. On the other hand, if people are leaving Dallas, then less population, less demand, and demand curve will shift to the left. So this is very easy to understand. Okay, so and this happens basically whenever there is an overall change in population and when there is a geographic shift in population or demographic change. Okay, then we have level of income. In general, we know if your income goes up, then you will buy more of a good, right? However, goods have been classified in 3 different ways. Okay, so the first one is called normal goods. Normal goods. Second one is called inferior goods. And third one is called luxury goods. Now there are other types of goods such as gift goods or other types of goods, but for this class we don't have to know these. But for now you need to know what these 3 types of goods means and how their demand is affected by income. Okay, so in terms of normal goods, if income goes up, so if income go up, demand for this type of goods will go up, and if income goes down, demand for this type of good will go down. Okay, example would be new cars. You know, if your let's say annual salary was 50,000, but now let's say you get a new job and you get paid $70,000, you will probably end up buying a new car. Okay, so that's a normal good. Normal good is anything that in general you will buy, you know, basically new car, new clothes, laptops, you know, TVs. These are all normal goods. Okay, now inferior good, this is another type of good, and I will give example. For this type of good, if income goes up, demand actually falls for this type of goods, and if income falls, demand actually goes up for this type of good. Now that's strange. In general we won't have that, but let's look at the example of used cars, right? If your income goes up, you will probably switch to a new car. You will buy a new car and you will not buy a used car. So your demand for used car will go down. On the other hand, if your income is going down, now you will probably try to save some of your money and buy a used car, so your demand will go up. Okay, so that's an example of inferior good. So inferior good is when basically your demand falls when income goes up and vice versa. Okay, maybe you can think about, you know, white bread, okay, versus organic bread, organic vegetable versus normal vegetable. So normal vegetable would be inferior goods and organic vegetable would be normal goods. Okay, and then finally we have luxury goods. What it means is if income goes up, demand goes up but at a greater percentage. And vice versa. So if your income goes down, the demand goes down by a greater percentage. Okay, so what that means is, let's say if your income goes up by 5%, your demand for this type of product will go up by 7%. So although there is an increase in income, the demand for this type of good goes up by a greater percentage. An example would be BMW. Okay, so that's a luxury car or luxury good, and if your income goes up, the demand for this type of good goes up by a greater percentage, or if your income goes down, the demand for this type of good goes down by a greater percentage. So this can affect the demand curve. Okay, so if your income goes up, what will happen? If your income goes up, for normal goods, the demand curve will shift to the right. Right, if your income goes up. For inferior goods, if your income goes up, the demand curve will shift to the left, and for luxury goods, if your income goes up, the demand curve will shift further at a greater percentage. It will shift to the right, but at a greater percentage. So that's how different types of goods will react to different types of goods will react to income, and the curves and the demand curves will shift accordingly. Okay. Now another factor that affects the demand is the price of related goods. So there are two types of related goods: substitutes and complementary goods. Okay, now I know I talked a little bit about substitutes. What our substitutes are: basically substitutes are goods that have similar characteristics and they can be replaced by one another. Okay, so let's say an example would be Coke and Pepsi. They are substitutes, right? They taste very similar, they look very similar, and they can be replaced by one another. Now there can be some slight differences between the two, but pretty much they're very much similar and they can be replaced. Or another example would be, Colgate toothpaste versus another brand of toothpaste. So that would be substitute. Okay, and this can affect demand. Okay, the price of substitute can affect the demand of the good. On the other hand, the price of complementary goods can affect the price of the good. So complementary are the two goods that are used together. Okay, they are purchased and consumed together. An example would be pencil and eraser. So if you are using a pencil, you will need an eraser. Another example would be toothpaste and toothbrush. If you are buying a toothpaste, you will need a toothbrush to use the toothpaste. So these are the examples of complementary goods. So what it means is basically you are buying two products and consuming them together. Now, how does a change in price of a substitute affect the demand for the other product, or same way for the complementary goods? So let us look at an example so it's clear to you guys. So let's say we look at the example of substitutes. Okay, and our example here, let's say we take Coke and Pepsi. Okay, now let's say we are given with the graphs for this is, let's say, for Coke, this is let's say for Pepsi, and this is the demand curve, this is the demand curve. Okay, now let's say Pepsi, the price of Coke, one Coke is $2, and at $2 100 people will buy Coke. On the other hand, the price of Pepsi is, let's say, $1, and let's say 80 people will buy Pepsi. Okay, now suddenly the price of Coke goes up to $3 for some reason. Let's say the price of Coke goes up to $3. So now the demand falls to 80. Now only 80 people will buy Coke because the price has gone up. Many people cannot afford Coke at this new price. So 20 people are not going to buy Coke. Okay, so as a result, there is a movement along the curve for the demand curve for Coke. But what happens to these 20 people? These 20 people will shift to Pepsi, right? But Pepsi's price did not change. So now instead of 80 people at $1, it's actually 100 people who's buying Pepsi. So the demand curve for Pepsi is shifting to the right because there has been an increase in price in the substitute. So because the price of Coke went up, some of the people cannot afford Coke now. They are going to switch to Pepsi. Pepsi's price is not changing, but now their demand is more, so the demand curve for Pepsi shifts to the right. So that's how the price of a substitute can affect the demand curve, and in general it is said that a change in price of one will cause a change in demand for the other in the same direction. So in this case, for substitutes, if the price goes up, the demand for the other product will go up. So if the price of a product goes up, the demand for the substitute will go up. So it's in the same direction. The price of one product goes up, that means the demand for the substitute will go up. So that's substitute. Now let's look at complements. Okay, Same way we look at complements. Now the example of complements, let's say we do, is laptops and mouse. Okay, so let's say laptops and mouse are complements. They are often used or consumed and purchased together. So this is the curve for laptop. This is the demand curve. This is quantity demanded. This is price as usual, and this is for mouse. Okay, now let's say price of laptop on average is $300, and at that price 1000 laptops will be bought. Okay, and let's say again with 1000 laptops we will buy 1000 mouse, and let's say the price of mouse is, let's say, $30. Okay, now for some reasons, maybe due to some technological advancements or something, the price of laptops goes down to $200. So now 1500 people will buy the laptop because there is a decrease in price. More people have ability to buy the laptops, so 1500 people will buy, but this additional 500 people will now also need mouse, but the price of mouse did not go up. So instead of 1000 at $30, now 1500 people will buy mouse, and the curve will shift to the right for mouse, even though there is no change in price for mouse. So for complementary goods, if you see, when there is a decrease in price of one good, the demand curve will shift to the right, or demand will go up for the other product. So they move in the opposite direction. In case of substitutes, they move in the same direction, whereas in complements they move in the opposite direction, because here for laptops there has been a movement along the curve because price changed. Other factors did not change, price changed, so there has been a movement along the curve. But for mouse there has been no change in price, but other factor has changed. Basically the price of the related good has changed, and that's what causes the demand curve to shift to the right. So this is another important things to notice, is when there is a change in price there will be a movement along the curve. When there is a change in other factors there will be a shift in the curve, and this probably will explain you how the price of complement can affect the demand for your good. So hopefully that's clear, and that gives you a better idea of how complements and supplements or complements and substitutes can affect the demand for a good. And then I can ask you to give some examples of complements or substitutes and explain through the graphs. Okay, and the final factor that affects the demand is consumer expectation. So if the consumer expects the price of an item to go up in the future, then demand at this time will go up, because we are thinking in the future. Let's say an example, in the future we are assuming the price of homes will go up, so whoever wants to buy home, they will go ahead and buy the home now, because now it is a good time, reasonable prices are available, so we want to buy it now because in the future it's going to go up. So that's consumer expectation, and in that case the demand curve currently will shift to the right, and demand curve in the future will shift to the left. Another very good example would be, let's say, for electronics. Okay, during Thanksgiving, everybody wants to buy TVs. Now during Thanksgiving we have great sales going on, right? Black Friday sales. So we will probably hold our demand until Thanksgiving. So what will happen to the demand for electronics right now? The demand for electronics right now will go down, so the demand curve will shift to the left, and in the future the demand curve for electronics will shift to the right. So consumer expectations, if I'm expecting the prices will go up in the future, my demand right now will go up and demand curve will shift to the right. On the other hand, if I think the prices will go down in the future, I will decrease my demand now, so the demand curve will shift to the left. So this is another factor that affects the demand curve and causes shift in the demand graph or demand curve. So the 5 factors are basically, again, the taste and preference, the number of buyers, the level of income. Now under level of income there are 3 types of goods: normal goods, inferior goods, and luxury goods. Then we have price of related goods, price of substitute, price of complements, and then finally we have consumer expectations that can cause the demand curve to shift to the right or to the left. Basically, these 5 factors can cause the demand curve of a good to shift to the right or to the left. Okay, so that's the end of this chapter. Next class or next video lecture, I will basically do lecture 5, which will talk about supply and equilibrium in the market. But for now, we were only going to focus in this lecture, we are only going to talk about demand. So I will be back soon again. You guys stay safe. Thank you very much. Bye bye.